Anyone who is in a market for an LMS will inevitably face a key question early on in the cycle. What kind of LMS do you want to procure for your workplace? You typically have two choices. Number one is look for an LMS as an add-on module to your HRMS system, or look for an independent LMS entirely. Now, this question obviously has several implications, and every organization's situation is very unique to itself. So it's important that we look at this whole question very objectively. Our guest today helps us out with exactly that. Let's jump in. Hi everyone. Our guest today is Prabhu Kanakraj. Prabhu is the Senior Manager HR at Hotel Hub. Prabhu is an alumni of XLI Jamshedpur. Prior to Hotel Hub, Prabhu has also worked at Thomas Cook and BCT Travel. Overall, Prabhu has about 15 years of experience across various capacities in HR departments. Prabhu, we are so delighted to have you with us this morning. Thank you for taking time out. And the point of consideration for us today that we want to deliberate upon is the whole question about the type of elements that L&D leaders should reach out for. So anybody who's in this space of adopting a learning management system typically faces this question of whether they should go ahead and look for HRMS that has an LMS module built into it, or maybe look for a LMS that is independent in itself. Both the options have their own pros and cons, and I want to pick your brains this morning. What are your thoughts? Once you look at it from the outside, and how would you advise the leaders to address that conundrum, that question, before they take a decision on what path to go for? Prabhu.
Thanks, Dheeraj, for the introduction. It's nice talking to you today. So I come with a blend of experience in managing HR, different verticals of HR, including learning and development at a different stage of my career. So I might have a different view altogether in this regard in terms of what should we have. Should we have HRMS with LMS integrated, or it should be a standalone system? In my experience of working on learning and development as one single vertical, not getting involved in the other areas of HR, I have always seen a disconnect between what we do as a core talent management, excluding learning and development, and what we do in learning development as a standalone activity. A lot of times we do performance management and learning and development as a standalone activity, and a lot of times we see a disconnect between these two. In my experience of working on developing a performance management framework or competency framework, and working on developing learning and development to help people scale up, okay, I've always seen a disconnect. There is no connect between these three areas whatsoever. And people have tried, even myself have tried having a connect between what we bring into performance management framework and competency, and that gets translated into learning and development to help people scale up. But it is a half-baked approach most of the times. Okay, one of the reasons could be that the systems that we have in any organization is not well integrated or well understood by the analyst or the people who work to integrate these three areas of work. That would obviously help people approach learning and development in the way it should be. So for example, when we have performance management framework, we usually assess people on their performance and where do they stand in the KPIs that are applicable for them.
Right.
And that gets translated into certain performance gaps. And obviously, when we look at performance gaps, it's an organic approach in terms of how do we address performance gaps, and that gets translated into what are the competencies that are required to perform that particular job role, which could help the individual plug the performance gap. And when we talk about competencies, okay, these are the competencies required to perform a job role, and that would ultimately help the person perform better. So that way, what are the learning and development opportunities the individual should ideally have to address the performance gap? So this is the basic workflow of where it starts and where it should ideally end. But we don't have a connect between performance, competencies, and learning and development. We really do not know where we head on. And even if we are identifying any learning and development opportunities by ourselves without any systems interventions, it could go right, because if we have a dedicated approach to identify learning and development opportunities to address performance gaps, competency gaps, it could go well. But when we completely rely on standalone systems and we randomly pick learning and development programs to address performance gaps and not identify how these learning and development approaches would ultimately resolve the performance gaps and competence, and we don't track it, we don't measure it, I don't think even if we are doing it by ourselves without systems intervention, I don't think we are going to succeed in what we intend to do. This is my experience of working with the different systems that I have, for performance management, and a different system for developing a competency framework, and an absolutely different system for learning and development. Three different systems, and they don't communicate one another. And but we need to intervene and pick those details, and if the systems allow us to integrate, yes, it's well and good. But if systems don't allow us to integrate, or it is standalone and we require some APIs to help us integrate, that helps. But otherwise, I don't recommend three systems working as a standalone entity, because it involves a lot of manual intervention to pick details from three different systems and put it all together. And a lot of work happens after even having a learning and development program. It doesn't end when an individual takes up a learning and development program in an objective of meeting a performance gap or competency gap. It doesn't end there. It goes beyond that in terms of measuring how far the person has exhibited that learning on the job. And it goes on to the self-assessment, to the manager's assessment, or even if it could be it could be a 360-degree assessment. And it goes on till assessments and whether the person has met the objective that was intended to meet. I think, in my opinion, these three systems should be integrated, if not as a one system, but at least we should have APIs that connect these three systems together to ensure they communicate meaningful information about talents and make meaningful impacts in their career.
So what you're suggesting is definitely no standalone system. That's one. Performance management, learning, and competency framework, right? Ideally, should be in a single unit, or even if they're separate, there has to be an ability for them to be integrated, right?
Correct.
Otherwise, they don't really make sense, because the job of the HR leader just kind of just gets split between just managing the information back and forth, right?
That's right. One point is it makes our job difficult. And at one point of time, it becomes a little inaccurate, because when we define certain things in the system, it operates in the way we have originally designed it for. But over the period of time, when we require a manual intervention in what we are intending to do, it could change, it could go wrong, and we lose control over the original design of what we want the system to do, right? So that's why I really advise these three systems to communicate by what we have designed to do, and avoid manual interventions to certain extent.
Right, brilliant. I think that's very powerful insight. So Prabhu, let me ask you another question. So we spoke about these three areas, right? Performance, competency, and learning management, right? So what we've seen, I mean, we've done over about 1,500 demos over the last about two odd years. And what we've come to understand is that there is an inherent charm for the HR leaders to look for an HRMS, right? A comprehensive, HR management system that also has an LMS module built in, right? So these three things we spoke about are only three modules, right? Learning, competency, and performance, right? However, what we've come to know, and I know, and I'm biased, right? Because we have our own platform, but no, trying to look at it very objectively, what we've come to see is that these systems, right? These three that you spoke about, right? They end up being like small modules, which are more like check in the box, right? They're not really thoroughly developed product, right? With its own lifeline, its own release cycles, and if there are requests from the customers for a specific feature or even advanced features, right? So, for example, in learning management system, right, something called a learning path or supervisor feedback, right? They're slightly more advanced than usual, right? They're either not there, or even if they accept the request to take it, it takes enormously long to bring those features into the cycle. Would you think that's kind of a consideration that like a CHRO should kind of take in before going down a path? Or what has been your experience? I'm just trying to remove the biases from my point of view.
See, according to me, when we talk about learning path in specific, okay, so that's absolutely a consideration when we work on three different areas. Whether it's learning and it's not just about learning and development. It doesn't start there. The starting point is starts from building competency frameworks, and then having your performance management framework, link both together, and then identify the outcome of these two, and then build your learning and development system that helps these two entities of like performance management and competencies, right? So ideally, learning path drives the connectivity between what we are doing in competency framework and performance framework, and what you want to do in your learning and development. So basically, that's the connectivity. That's a essence of having the connections between these three platforms. So yes, I would recommend that anyone who builds these three systems as a standalone entity and want integrated at a later point of time, a learning path is the connection, right. And that helps us identify if someone wants to take up a program, and there should be intent behind and an objective behind why they want to take up that program and how that's going to benefit them in a particular area of work. And yes, it doesn't mean that there should be an objective behind every learning. Yes, there is an objective in terms of what I want to learn in my personal interest, but there are a lot of times in an organization we want people to learn that has an impact on the work they do for the organization. It could be related to the work they are performing at this point of time, or it could be the work they are planning to take up, or a role they are planning to take up in the future. So these are the two main objectives for an organization. At the same time, we allow people to go on free learning. You learn what you want to learn, irrespective of what you're going to contribute to the organization or to the role that you're playing. That's okay. But the ultimate objectives are two: that yes, what you want to learn that's going to potential impact on your current role, and what you want to learn that's going to have a potential impact on the role that you want to take up in the future. So the learning path helps us define this direction for us.
Right.
So that's my opinion.
Right. Great. Prabhu, this will be very, very helpful. So if I would just summarize our discussion, what we're saying is, for L&D leaders' success in the space of helping improve the learning outcomes, they need to have an integrated learning management, competency framework, and performance management, number one. Number two is learning path is a very important consideration. Whether it is part of your competency framework or it's part of your LMS, that has to be brought into the entire system for
That's
the
right.
overall objective to be met.
True, true.
Great.
And in most of scenarios, because we have interventional programs in whatever the programs that I had before in terms of developing high potentials or developing future leaders, developing the existing leaders. When we build learning paths, is more of interventional programs, means it is a long time program. It doesn't happen overnight. The improvement doesn't happen overnight. The program doesn't get over overnight. It's a long it's a lengthy program, and learning paths are not static. It's dynamic, because people's role change, people's work behaviors change, and their performance tends to change because of the changing organizational needs and the changing or the team dynamics. So learning path tends to change, and it's dynamic, and we cannot set a learning path at the start and say that that's the path that you have to follow for the rest of your period. I think we need to have it dynamic, and that helps individuals that, in case I have changing roles or changing needs for the organization, I have the flexibility to change my learning path as well. And that gets translated. Obviously, our performance or key performance indicators do change when our roles change, when the organization needs change, and in turn, the competencies required to perform the job roles do change.
Super. Great. Prabhu, thank you so much for your time on this call. I think there've been a lot of insights that would be very beneficial. So thank you again, and hope to talk to you again soon. Okay, so several insights over here. First one, and probably the most important, that sets the context. So insight number one, before you set up an LMS, you must keep in mind that for any L&D leader to succeed in the process of the learning journey, three things must come together: performance management, learning management, and a competency framework, without which all the choices of LMS just stop making sense. Insight number two, look at the LMS that is a module or a feature built inside your already existing HRMS. There's obviously a key advantage over here, that one being that there is one source of true data. Everything is already pre-integrated, so you're not scrambling around putting data together. However, there are several disadvantages. Number one being learning, performance, and competency frameworks are at best small modules or features inside your HRMS. And the corollary to that piece is that if you want a new feature to be built into your LMS module, it must compete with other feature requests across several other modules within your HRMS. So that's the piece that you have to deal with. Now, if you go for a standalone LMS, there are obviously few advantages. Number one being that it's a comprehensive, it contains a comprehensive feature list. Number two, the LMS is constantly evolving on the basis of the inputs that the LMS vendor gets from their customers. So that's obviously very important. However, there are also several drawbacks in a standalone LMS. Number one being data collection is a nightmare and almost always is inaccurate, because you end up going manual to integrate the stuff, and that just doesn't add up all the time. The other disadvantage being, for a standalone LMS, that it will be nearly impossible to tie in competency framework, performance management along with your LMS. Finally, we come to the third option that we didn't talk about earlier on, which kind of makes a lot of sense, as an outcome of our conversation. That is, look for an LMS that is able to integrate with the systems outside, whether it's an HRMS, your performance management, or your competency framework, if those things are separately existing. What are the advantages over here? Number one, this approach offers you the best of both the worlds. The microservices allow you to integrate your LMS with the external systems. The features are very relevant. They are obviously advanced because they're also constantly evolving in the process. The evolved LMSs will also have features like a learning path that will help you grow the individual learner from stage to stage as they go through their career. You can also collect supervisor feedback onto the specific competencies and map it to the performance of the learner. We hope you found this useful. So until next time, take care.